Welcome to First in Fiction, your first stop for learning to write fantastic fiction. I'm your host, Aaron Gansky, author of The Bargain, The Hand of Adonai series, and Firsts in Fiction.
And I'm Alton Gansky, coming to you from the center part of the state of California. I'm the author of, and I've recounted 50 works of fiction and nonfiction. And my most recent is a re-release of Through My Eyes.
Which is doing well, I hear.
You know, it is the sales of the re-released books has been doing all right this month, probably the best month ever. Not that I'm going to retire off of it, but it has, Through My Eyes, has really taken off. It's probably sold more than any other book I've had that I've republished or self-published. So in a single month anyway. So it's kind of taken off.
And we talked a little bit about this before the show. I'm going to go ahead and give all the credit for your sales to Firsts in Fiction because I said that was one of the favorite books of yours that I've read. And so I'm sure that all of our listeners went and bought their copy this last week or two. So thanks to all our listeners. And we'll just, Pops, I don't know if you believe that or not, but it seems fair to me. It seems like a reasonable deduction, right?
Oh, it comforts me on a cold night. Of course, I'm in Fresno, so there's no cold nights. Summer's already started. We've begun our 6 months of summer here in the center part of the state. So,
yeah, we've got that in the desert. We've got 7.5 months of summer, and then a couple weeks of everything else.
Don't exaggerate. It's 6.9.
All right. And Molly has joined us. Welcome back, Molly. Why don't you introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Molly Jo Riley. I am producer of the podcast When I Can Get Online. I am the writer of the Unemployment Cookbook, the up-and-coming mystery location novel NOLA, and today I am not a computer expert.
And we do welcome all of you computer experts who are listening, and maybe we'll give you a call soon and figure out some of our tech issues. But if you are watching us via YouTube, thank you for that. Please hit that thumbs up button for us. It helps out quite a bit. Don't forget to tell your friends and have them subscribe. We really appreciate all our subscribers. Another quick reminder to ask the author. You can do that via Facebook or Twitter or email firstsinfictionpodcast@gmail.com. Any of those are valid ways of getting in touch with us or just finding us, our personal Facebook accounts or Twitter accounts. Just stalk us. We openly welcome stalkers, open arms. I love all of my stalkers. I don't have any. Should I be depressed that I don't have any stalkers, or maybe I should be happy about that?
There are better things to be depressed about.
You don't want to invite trouble, so be quiet. Be quiet now.
All right. So, our Ask the Author question. We're gonna do something a little bit different tonight, guys. Instead of Ask the Author, we're going to have a new segment called Author Asks the Authors, because we didn't have any more Ask the Author questions. So kind of tried up there for a little bit. So we need you to send some questions into us. For now, we'll do Author Asks the Author. And I will be the author, the token author tonight. And I'm going to ask, where did the idea for your first novel come from? And that's a good question, Aaron. Thank you so much for asking that. You're welcome, Aaron. Okay. My first novel is not published. It's a little multiple personality here. My first novel is not published, and it probably never will be because it's no good. But the idea came from a dream that I had as a youngster, where I had a dream that I fell in love with a ghost, which is a pretty normal dream, right? And so I remember it was a pretty powerful dream, and so I kind of thought it would make a good story. I started fleshing out the details, and of course you can't have a ghost without a serial killer, so it became this kind of suspense serial killer novel where the romance between the protagonist and the ghost played an integral role, and he was able to stop the serial killer and blah, blah, blah. So the concept doesn't sound terrible, but the execution of it was left a little bit to be desired, or a whole lot to be desired, one of the two. I'll let you choose when you never read it. Okay. All right, Pops, how about you?
I was just thinking of the ghost, and I think it's Mrs. Muir. They did a television series based on that. I believe it was a book before, and it's about a woman who falls in love with a ghost. So, well, I've told the story before, so I'm not going to belabor it much, but back in my pastor days, I had been called to a children's hospital. A child had fallen out of a moving car. That was the word that I got. Some of our church members, of course, this is the worst part about being a writer of fiction. You can imagine horrible, horrible things. They haunt you. So let me just cut to the quick on this. The child was fine. There was a few scrapes and bruises. Car was barely moving, so all good on that case. But it was very revelatory to me because as I walked through the hospital, I noticed the only thing I would look at is the floor. I didn't want to see children in pain, so I didn't look in the rooms. And I caught glimpses of some things that haunt me even to this day. But I was really just didn't have the integrity and the strength to be able to do that. And once I had finished doing what I needed to do, and then was headed back, I came under a great deal of conviction about that. I felt very bad about it. And so it began to percolate. And by the time I got back to my car, I was thinking, wouldn't it be wonderful if somebody could just walk into a hospital like that and heal those kids? And out of that came a story after I worked it over some more and turned it into to something that could be a novel, came my first novel, By My Hands, which was published in 1996. So it came out of a moment of shame, and I worked through that moment of shame by writing a book about it. And that's how I came to do my first novel, and I assumed I was going to be writing nonfiction, so that one kind of caught me by surprise.
Yeah. Good book, too. Good book, too. Molly, do you... Oh, nope, not Molly. Apparently not. She just dropped out again. So we will hope that she returns so she can give us her answer. But for now, I guess we could just kind of jump into our topic tonight, still covering the changing, well, not the changing world of publication, the business of publication. And Molly is back with us. So Molly, do you want to share your first contracts? Yeah. Did you want to share your story of your first novel?
Yeah, I'm still working on it. I honestly don't remember how the idea came to me. I think it was when you and I were when you first joined the Writers Club and we were doing salons and teaching on short stories and stuff like that. I had a couple of ideas. I thought just to get out there and market myself, instead of working on a big book, I want to start selling short stories again to magazine articles. I honestly don't remember how the idea came to me, but I know that the more I thought about it, the more I realized I had too much to say, and as I sussed it out, it turned itself into a full-length novel. So that is my story.
Excellent. Oh yeah, my first novel started as a short story as well. It was, I think, 20 pages, and then it was 25, and then it was 50, and that's when I said, like, I've got to make a choice here. And I went with the longer rather than the shorter, and there you go. That's how we got mine. Pops, did your novel start out as a novel?
Yeah, I knew it was fiction from the beginning. The time I got home, I was driving home, and the idea was percolating. I knew that it was going to be a novel. I couldn't figure out how to do it as a nonfiction book because it involves a healer who goes in the hospital, but he keeps his identity hidden. He sneaks in. He does all kinds of things to stay out of the public eye. And really what it did is it led to the next question, what would happen to the hospital, what would happen to the families, what would happen to the community if anything like that went on. And that was half the fun, was figuring that out. How something like that appears to be very good in the beginning becomes extremely complicated as time goes on. And then, of course, throw in a bad guy or two and some danger and a little adventure here and there, and you end up with a novel. So, yeah, that's I knew from the beginning it was going to be a novel.
Excellent. All right. I know a lot of people who start with a short story and then it expands and expands. So I've also taken longer short stories and cut them down quite a bit. Leaving Tennessee was originally like 25 pages or so and ended up around 10. So it can go both ways. But tonight we are here to talk about contracts. So I want to make sure that we get in there because we've got lots of questions to ask. And Pops, I'm going to put you on the hot seat again, because I just said again twice. I said again. All right. That's too many agains. You have been at this for quite some time, 20 years or so, and that means you've seen quite a few contracts in all their different shapes and sizes, etc. So my first question would simply be, is this are these waters you want to navigate on your own, or is this something that you would really recommend having an agent for?
Well, first a disclaimer. I am not an attorney. None of us here are. We're not giving legal advice. We're just talking out of experiences that we have. The author is going to need to go over the contract. You really can't get out of that. And I'll tell you why. I have gone over every contract that I receive, and I kind of pour over it. I don't especially enjoy it. I don't wake up in the morning and go, hoo, baby, I'm going to go through 20 pages of contract legalese. Not many people do that. Attorneys might like it. It just doesn't ring my bell. But nonetheless, I need to know what I'm signing because it is my name on the contract. It's not the agent's name on the contract. It's no one else's name. It's my name. And if any problem comes up, I have to be able to say, yes, I read the contract with that. So at some points, you need to go through, learn some of the ins and outs of them, which we'll talk about some here tonight. But it doesn't mean that you necessarily have to negotiate them. Ideally, if you have an agent, that's the agent's job. But now here's the thing. Agents go through lots and lots of contracts, and sometimes they rush them. And on numerous occasions, I've contacted my agents, and I've gone over this contract now, and I have a question about this particular paragraph. This is how I read it. And they would say, I didn't even see that. So had I not gone over it, I would have been signing something that had been to my detriment. So yeah, you do need to go over it. You will have to learn some terms. It just comes to you. It's just part of the job. And fortunately, you're not going to be doing that every week. So you may have to set aside a couple of days every time you get a new book contract, and then go over it. And I recommend going over it from top to bottom, jotting down any questions you have if you have someone you can ask. And sometimes you have to learn to hold their feet to the fire. So I'll just go ahead and make this statement about that. I've talked with attorneys before who have told me this. Usually an attorney won't say this kind of thing, but I remember a conversation I was having with an attorney about a different matter, and I was going over the contract they wanted me to sign, and I said, this contract says this, and I'm not comfortable with it. And they go, well, we don't mean that. So you don't mean what? So, well, the way you're reading that, we don't mean it that way. I said, but it's what it says, right? And they said, yeah, that's what it says, but we don't mean that. And I said, well, it doesn't matter what you mean. It matters what you say. Because when it goes to court, if there's any kind of problem like that, they can deny that. The judge isn't really going to care. It says it's what it says, not what you mean. And so, at times I've had to ask them to change things, and usually it's not a very painful process. It's not always fun to read, but most of the time they will work with you, and if you have good reasons to have changes, most publishers will make them. That's in general. So there's that. I've gone over quite a few contracts. I've gone over some for other people, though I don't give legal advice. And if you do need legal advice, let me tack this on. You may have an agent who goes over, but remember, agents are not attorneys either. They cannot practice law. They cannot give you legal advice. What they can do is they can tell you, from my experience and working with this people, this is what they mean. I think this is going to be the best you're going to get on this particular situation. I know they won't cut it. I know they won't change it, or they may cut it. They may change it. They're speaking from experience, but they're not giving legal advice. So if for any reason you have to get an attorney involved, then you have to be very careful. Not any attorney can do it. It's just like doctors or specialists. Dentists don't do cardiac surgery. Cardiologists, don't do whatever. Dentistry. They don't fix up the inner ear or anything like that.
Fillings.
Yeah, they don't do fillings. It's the same thing with law. Lawyers specialize in areas, so you want to get someone who knows entertainment law, and there's not as many of those, but they will know the latest court decisions. Now, I've never had to use an attorney on a contract. But if it ever came up where I needed to, that's what I would do, is I start looking for somebody who knows entertainment law. And I know a lot of attorneys, but none of them are entertainment attorneys.
Right, absolutely. Now, there's probably more contracts than just a book contract at stake here. As a writer, you're probably going to have to sign another contract. Is that correct?
Yeah, if you get an agent involved, there's usually a contract with that. Now, occasionally you'll come across an agent, especially if you've been in the business for a while. I don't have a contract with my agent, but I did have a contract with all the other agents I had before him. And the reason is it's just a handshake deal kind of thing. We trust each other, so it's not a problem. Uh, but most of the time, especially if you're starting out, and most of our listeners are doing that, you'll have to sign a contract with an agent, and that is something you'll have to go over too. And you'll need to know, for example, that the typical percentage rate for an agent is 15%, goes up to 20% if they have to bring in somebody to handle movies and stuff like that. So you need to know what it is you're getting involved in, what they will and won't do. Normally, agent contracts are not very long, maybe 2-3 pages, something like that. Where publishing contracts can be, I've seen them 25 pages long. I've seen them, much shorter. But in the business of writing, you will most likely come across 2 contracts if you're talking book length. One's going to be with your agent, and one's going to be with the publisher. And then if you're doing, say, short fiction, you may have to sign a small contract, which you're allowing the publisher of, let's say it's a mystery magazine or something like that. You have to give them rights to publish that, and they buy a certain type of right. So if you're doing those kinds of things, then you may have some contracts to look at.
Yeah. When we worked with the Citron Review, when we set that up, we wanted everything to be as simple and streamlined as possible. So we had something on our website that just simply said we've got first run rights, and then after that everything goes back to the author, because we didn't want to deal with any sort of legal ramifications and the like. Mm-hmm. We did stipulate that if the piece was going to be republished, that they should credit original publication as the Citron Review. And we've had actually quite a few pieces go on to bigger and better things, if you will, and credited us. So the name The Citron Review is floating around out there in literature, and great literature. So it's always exciting, but it is definitely something that you want to consider. Absolutely. Now, the contract is drawn up by the publisher, and so is it a fair assumption then that the contract is going to inherently favor the publisher?
Yeah, and it's just simply the way the world works. Contracts are pulled together by attorneys. It's one of the first things they learn in law school. And attorneys have clients. So the publisher is the client for the attorney, and the attorney is going to do everything the attorney possibly can to protect that client. And that is their legal and moral obligation, is to protect their client as much as possible. So usually these things are skewed towards the publisher and protecting them, and that's true with any contract you sign. If you have a contractor come over to do a room edition, that contract is usually skewed towards the contractor, so you have to be careful what you sign there too. But many publishers know that they need to also protect their authors, and those that have the best reputations will have clauses in the contract that protect you as the writer, and they've gone out of their way to do that, and they're saying, we know this. This is what you need, and this is what we will do, and we agree to do this for you on your behalf. And that's nice when you get that. And I would say most of the ones you deal with will have some clauses like that, but they are skewed towards the publisher, to protect the publisher from the writer and from other things that may happen.
What do you mean when you say they protect the publisher from the writer? Like myself, as a first-time novelist, if I were to have a contract, what possible harm could I do to a publishing firm? I mean, they are the ones that kind of, hold the dice in the game. So what harm? Why is a contract written? What could I do to them?
Really several things. One, you could claim, it's called warranting. That you admit, and you would warrant that the work is original to you and no one else has claim on it, but let's say you steal some of it. And it goes on all the time. Plagiarism. There's quite a few people that have had best-selling books in the New York Times, and then they're called out on plagiarism. Well, there's going to be a lawsuit, and the way most of the contracts are arranged, it's the publisher who gets sued. And the author is named in the suit, but unless you're pulling down Dean Koontz, Stephen King kind of money, Baldacci kind of money coming in to you, they're going to go after the publisher because the pockets are deeper. So the publisher has to protect themselves from either mistakes by the writer or from misuse, from abuse, such as claiming that your work is original when it's um, not delivering on time, delivering something different than what you had promised them. You deliver an entirely different book, an entirely different genre. Um, you suddenly bring in another writer to help you with it, and that writer's supposed to get credit. That's not part of the contract. Publishers had no contact with him. And so one of the things they have to do is get all that lined up so that you can't either intentionally or inadvertently um, get them all tied up in knots and have them spending a ton of money. So sometimes what they're doing is they're protecting themselves from that kind of abuse.
Which makes sense, and that might be things that authors do unintentionally, but again, it's important for the publishers to be able to protect themselves. I feel like those are going to be the contracts that run a little bit longer in length rather than the shorter ones, or the bigger publishers who have had to deal with those types of issues. Do you notice it pops a correlation between the size of the publisher and the size of the contract?
That's an interesting question. Yeah, I do. I think the longest contracts I had was with Zondervan, which is a part of Harper Row, and which is a big publishing company, and their contracts, as I recall, ran fairly long. And then with some of the smaller publishers, the contracts are a little shorter, and so it'll vary. They're not the same. No two contracts are the same, unless you're dealing with the same publisher, and then they're almost identical. They just recycle them all. It's all boilerplate. That's why you have to go over it, because some of it may not apply to you. I've gotten contracts for nonfiction books when I was writing a novel. I had to go in and cross out the stuff that pertained to nonfiction books and those sorts of things. It's just because in that particular case they weren't very studious. They had not gone over their own contract. They just sent out the boilerplate one. And that's how they do it. And that's one of the things to remember is you get the contract first. You get to review it first. If you like it, then you sign it. You send it to them. Then they'll sign it. A publisher always signs second. And the reason for that is because when it comes to you first, you may want to make changes. They'll always ask, for example, to have the rights, the movie rights, or they want half the whatever the money that comes in on an option. An option is when somebody says, I want to tie up this book for a while and I'm going to pay you this amount of money, and you agree for the next 2 years not to sell it to anyone else. Well, most publishers want at least half of that. And most agents and authors say, unless you're the one bringing the producer in, you don't deserve half of it. And so most will cross it out. But if you don't check it, you might be giving away half of that stuff. So that's one of the little pitfalls you have to look out for.
Would you say, is there a percentage of contracts that you're able to sign right away versus the percentage of those that you have to look at revisions first? Are you making revisions to 90% of the contracts that are extended to you, or do you find yourself maybe 50% of the time the contract seems pretty standard and you're good with it?
Yeah, it's pretty standard, and I know I'm not going to get everything I want. No one gets whatever they want on it. And though I have walked away a time or two because the contract was just too bad to sign. That doesn't happen often. Zondervan, for example, always had great contracts. They had stuff in there I could not sign. My agents wouldn't let me sign when they were in there, but they had already lined some of those out, so I would get the same contract for the next book. I did a lot of books for them. And I got to where what I would do is I would set the first contract next to the most recent contract, and I would just go page by page. And if all the stuff we'd lined out before was still lined out, then I was good with it. If there were new clauses put in, and that's one of the things you want to look for because things change all the time. So, then I'd spend more time camping on whatever that clause was and seeing where they were headed, and if the wording was suspect. And again, remember the people, so wording might be suspect simply because they didn't think it through.
Yeah, this is a lot to keep in mind. So, is there like a quick list, a hit list of the most important aspects of a contract that writers should be aware of? What exactly should we be looking for?
Well, there's really several things. for the hit list. One, you want to make sure that they have your name and they have it spelled correctly. Okay, so a Gansky sometimes comes in with an I instead of a Y. I don't know who this guy is. So you want to make it sure it's your contract. I got one once. It was a contract for someone else. They got put in the wrong envelopes. And I can't remember now. I think I was getting a bigger advance. So actually, I didn't look at it. Once I realized the name wasn't mine, I thought, let's send it back. I got someone's royalty check once from a big house, a big publisher, big New York publisher. I get this royalty check, and I said, I really appreciate this. I don't think the person who's waiting for it appreciates it, but I kind of like the little extra money. It wasn't a big check. Well, I had to write them a check, and then there had to be all these things that went on. But what they did is they just put the wrong sticker, the wrong label on the envelope. So that's why you have to check these things. So you want to make sure your name's on there. You want to make sure that they have the right Social Security number on there, because it has to be reported to the tax. If they have the wrong one, then that can turn into a nightmare. So you make sure that's right, and that your address is right. So that's off the bat. Then they're going to list your book. They'll usually do it by title, but it'll be a working title. Understand that the publisher reserves the right to change your title and will a large percentage of the time. That's because they work with their marketers and their salespeople and stuff. Sometimes what they'll do is if you're signing a multi-book contract, like you're going to do 3 books, they will just list it as work 1, work 2, work 3. And then you can hash those things out early on. So you want to make sure those things are correct. You want to make sure that of what the royalty breaks are. Royalties are usually broken down into 3 or 4 segments. So if you sell this many, you're going to get 18%, whether it's net or on the cover price. We'll talk about that a little bit later. Then if you sell over 10,000 books, and the rate goes up, and if you do more than that, then it goes up. And so there's bonuses in that, but you need to know what they are. You need to know what the advance is going to be, and this is always a real stickler here, guys, is how they're going to pay you the advance, because that's changed a lot, especially after 2008 when the economy went in the toilet. Major publishers were not doing what they used to do. Tradition is on your advance, you'd get half up front and half upon what's called DNA, which is delivery and acceptance. So it's the letter D, the word and A, delivery and acceptance, and then you'd get the second half then. But then some of them started going to thirds, some started going to 25%, and then I worked with one major publisher with this horrible thing. I ended up having to sign it, but you got the last part of the advance 6 months after the book came out. And if it takes them a year to put the book out, it's 18 months before you get that money. So you have to look at those and see what they're doing with that. Those sorts of things, and that you're not signing away all your future rights. They will often ask for what's called first right of refusal. That's a fair thing. Publishers, I think, should be allowed to look at your next book that's not under contract and see if they want to publish it. But when you do that, and I know I'm departing notes here, but I'm just following the question. If they do that, I just lost my train of thought. My train of thought just derailed. Just went off the tracks here.
First right of refusal.
First right of refusal. Thank you.
First right of refusal.
Yeah, and then make sure there's a time associated with this. I made that mistake, and my agent missed it once, and I never got paid that last portion because they could take forever to pay you. So I always ask for no more than 60 days. You have to decide 60 days if you like it or not, or 45 days. Always ask for less, they'll ask for a little bit more. If there's no date, then they can take forever. And I know somebody had to wait, I think 3 years before he got a rejection, but he couldn't circulate the thing anymore. The other thing you don't want to do is you don't want to give them absolute rights to whatever you write next. Because that'll ruin a career because you can't write for anyone else, so you don't want to give those away. All right, well that's a fairly long list there to get started with. But here's one of the keys. Don't let your desire to be published cloud your business decision making, your business acumen. I know when I signed my first one, I didn't care that much about the money. I did care that it was going to be a decent contract, but I wanted my first book out because that made it possible for me to get a second book out. So I wasn't locked up on the money part, but I wasn't going to just sign anything. That would have been foolish.
You know, when I was in the band, we had a couple different contract offers from some small-time labels, and I remember having you look at them, Pops, because I didn't know anything about contracts, and so I shipped them off to you, and you looked at them, and you were like, and I don't know if you laughed out loud or not, but I heard the chuckle in your voice when going over it, and you were able to point out some fallacies and some errors in the contracts that they were offering us, and they were not good. But I remember when I brought that to the band, everyone said, well, who cares? And it's fine, let's sign. And I was like, no, I'm not signing this. This is not something that I can sign. It would put my family's well-being at jeopardy, and it's just not something that's feasible. And you do want to look out for that. Absolutely, you want to look out for those things that could put you at risk.
And one of the things to keep in mind, usually you won't have problems with larger publishers. You still need to check it. Again, remember the contracts are written by attorneys who are protecting their client, the publisher. So you do have to go over it, but most of those you won't have a problem with. That's not to say it never happens, because I've known it to happen, but most of the time you won't. Smaller publishers, boutique publishers, who have not worked in publishing, they often don't know what they're getting into. And so they will ask you to sign ridiculous stuff. Some don't. Some are very good. Some get better with time. But it's incumbent upon you to take a look at it and say, there's no way I can sign this. And just because you're asking too much or I'm giving away too much, and you're not paying for those kinds of rights. So, yeah, you do really have to be careful about it.
So here's the question that I'm sure is on everybody's mind. Let's talk about the money. It specifically advances versus royalties. What does that look like in a contract? Is one necessarily better than the other, and what should we look for in that regard?
Yeah, you'll get different opinions on that. Let me define a couple terms. An advance means an advance on royalties. It's just shorthand for that. So when you read the word advance, that's what they're talking about, an advance on royalties. So the publisher is assuming they're going to be able to sell some books. Those books are going to make some money for them, and they're going to give you a percentage of that money as a royalty. But they're going to give you an advance, and this goes way back in publishing because the writers need to eat, and if they're having to work 2 jobs to do that, you're just going to get a lousy book, so the publishers don't like that. They will advance some money to you, and they will usually divide it up either half and half, usually half after you deliver it. I worked with Zondervan so long, I'd send the thing in, they would send me a letter saying, we may ask for some changes, but here's your check. Then I've worked with others who had to, you had to wait months for them to go through it before they would give it the acceptance. That's what an advance is. Royalties is just the simple payment based on the number of books that are sold. So one of the arguments is low advance, you get bigger royalties. But remember, in traditional publishing anyway, some of this is changing, but in traditional publishing, legacy publishing, you're only going to get paid twice a year. You get royalty statements twice a year, every 6 months, and payment on those are sometimes 3 months after that. You'll see that in the contract. It's really weird. So sometimes you may not see another check for 9 months, even if your book's doing well. It becomes huge #1 seller. You may still have to wait 6 months, 9 months before you see any more money. So I've always believed you get the biggest possible advance as you can, and you be patient for the royalties. Now again, this is me. My thinking is if they've advanced me a lot of money, they never do, but if they did advance me a lot of money, I might get better marketing and better treatment for the book because they have to earn that money back. Now, some say that never happens, but I don't know. So it's really just something you have to think through and decide which is better on that. But I believe that you should get an advance. There's going to have to be some money exchanged because that's what makes a contract a contract. That's why when you buy a car from somebody, they're going to give you a car. They'll ask you for $1. That makes it a legal transaction so they can transfer title. So there's got to be some exchange of money, and an advance is part of that. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah, it does. So it's not that one is necessarily better than
Mm-hmm.
the other. It's just, do you need the money up front or not? In my position with LPC, no advance. Again, it's a smaller publisher, but the royalty is very nice. The royalties are very nice, and I get those, I think, quarterly. And that's fine for me because I've got a day job. I've got insurance for the family. I don't have to worry about putting food in my kids' mouths because my other paycheck is going to do that for me. And so I'm able to take a contract like that. However, if I were a full-time writer and I needed that money, then I would have to probably be looking for an advance then. Um,
Yeah, if you're a working writer, it means your mortgage is going to come out of your next advance. Um, yeah, that matters quite a bit. Now, you do bring up something interesting. LPC Lighthouse Publishing of the Carolinas is more of a boutique type of publisher. That is, they're small, not many employees, and there's nothing wrong with that. Random House, which is huge, started with 2 people, and it's called Random House because they publish books at random. They didn't even have a schedule to be able to do this. Of course, they went on to great things with that, but with boutique things, they often do things differently. They may not pay an advance up front, or a very small advance if they do. But usually when that happens is you get paid more frequently. You're not getting paid twice a year. You might get paid quarterly, 4 times a year. You might even get paid monthly if most of it is digital sales. That might even happen. With Jeff Gerke, for example, who was doing the science fiction fantasy thing, they've just recently changed the name of that when Steve Lobby bought it. Steve Lobby, an agent, bought the publishing. But you started making money as soon as he earned back his expenses, which weren't huge. And I don't know what the actual expenses were, but then you get paid on a regular basis, and you got something like 50%. Well, you're not going to get 50% royalties on any traditional contract. You're going to get 18, maybe 20%. If you're really good, you might get 22 on the smaller side. And again, that'll also depend whether or not it's on the net or if it's on the cover price. Very different.
That is very different, and that's an important distinction there. Are you getting 40% of the net profit minus what it takes the publisher to actually produce the book, or are you getting 40% on the cover price, which would be, I guess, the gross? Is that the term to use for that?
Yeah, in the general market, they usually, again, there's always exceptions. That's why I keep hedging, and I hate to do that, but I'm trying to be as honest as I can about this, as clear about it as I can. Usually in the general market, you get paid a percentage of the cover price. Other publishers, like the ones I've worked with most of my career, they work on the net. The problem with the net is this is how much money's come in, but we've had to pay some money out for this, so that's going to lower that. And then so you're going to get a percentage on a much smaller amount of that. And it's very difficult to find out what the other money was spent on. You will have a legal right to audit them, but that's the quickest way to ruin a career. And you have to pay for the audit. No publisher is going to pay for you to bring in an accountant to go over the books to make sure you're not being cheated. So I like the general market one better. So if you're selling a hardbound book for $20, you may be making $4 a book. In the net ones, you might be making $1. So I know a $14 trade paper book. Trade paper is larger than mass market. Trade paper, working on net, it averaged out to like 80 cents a book. Where if it had been on the cover price, you'd be making $1.40. So you're getting 60%. So I've never been a fan of it, but it is the way many publishers work.
Molly?
So if you can write it into the contract, then the percentage of the cover price would be the better option.
I think so in most cases. But the publisher will either do that or they won't do that. You can't choose between them. You can't say, well, I don't like that manner of doing things. I want to do the cover price. The publishers aren't geared that way. Their accounting system, their royalty system, which can be very complex, at times almost impossible to read, they will just tell you the way it's done. I don't know anyone that's ever been able to change that. That's a company policy, and it affects a lot of what else they do.
So now, what about other publishing rights, such as international publishing, world publishing, movie options? Do most contracts stipulate for that?
Yeah, you will see. In fact, some put a chart in, and we usually cross those out with that. What the publisher is really signing up for is they want the rights to publish your book worldwide. And you give them exclusive rights to do that. You can't go to two publishers, or you can't give that to a publisher and then publish it yourself. That's, again, what we were talking about, why they sometimes have to defend themselves against writers. That's been done, where they sell it to a publisher, get in advance, and then they also self-publish it to kind of sweeten the deal. Well, that's unethical to do. In that, they will also usually ask for foreign rights. So my books have been, I always joke, I'm an international author because my books have been published in Canada, but they have been published elsewhere. They've been published in South America, and I used to be big in Holland. I don't know why, but for some reason I was big in Holland. The only country in the world I was big in was in Holland. Unfortunately, it's not a great big country, so it didn't make that big a difference. But they'll want those rights. They'll want ancillary rights, which are things like large print. But the people who buy those will pay for that, and you get a portion of that too. That's usually stipulated in the contract. So if Gale Publishing, I think it's Gale Publishing, does a large print version of things, they always pay something for it. And then in most contracts, you'll get a portion of that. They'll split that with you. They're going to want ebook rights. And the ebook rights, you probably get 25% of the sale price of the ebook. If you do it yourself, you're getting quite a bit more, but then again, you have to do it all yourself, and you don't have the marketing and other such things. So you get what you pay for, and you pay for what you get with that. So there'll be all those rights. Some will want, I've had contracts, they'll want all the rights to ancillary things like lunch boxes and toys, and because I'm just sure my books are going to make it big in the toy industry. But you never know. Movies, recordings, audio rights, they'll want those too.
Oh, but hand of ad night.
Yeah, maybe. We can always hope.
Yeah, those could go into toys. I could see that. But sometimes the publisher wants those, and they'll sell those rights to someone else who will do that work. They don't do the work usually. And then if it's going to be condensation, they take a lot of rights, but they also take most of the risk. So usually what we cut out, I say we, I mean my agent and I, we don't like to give them movie rights, either on the option, which is money paid for holding it. Doesn't mean they're going to make it into a movie. Sometimes that money is not enough to buy a decent-sized pizza, and take the family out for pizza anyway. But in my opinion, publishers don't have a right for that unless they bring the producer in. If they're bringing in the production house that's going to make the movie, well, that's a different ball game. With that, they should get paid something for that, but most of the time they're not going to do that. On your agent contract, what you will read is that your agent's going to take 15%. If a movie agent gets involved, which is a whole other ball game, that's just a different field. Most literary agents don't work the Hollywood side. Some of the big companies do. Morris West, he's a writer. William Morris, which is the largest agency. I was with them for a short time, number of years. They do that. They have people who work Hollywood. They have those who work New York stage stuff, plays. But the regular agent's going to get 20%. That agent's not being greedy. They have to give 10% of it to the Hollywood person.
Yeah,
so
that makes sense. So if you see something in the contract that's just not jiving with you, what's the best way to handle that? Is there a tactful way to talk to the publisher?
Oh yeah, it doesn't have to be a fist fight. If you have an agent, your agent will do that. You tell your agent, I'm uncomfortable with this. We need to reword it. This is too much time. If they can't read a book in 6 months, they probably shouldn't be in the business. They need to respond in a more reasonable amount of time. Often, what's done is you just line through it. Or your agent will, and if you're doing it on your own, then you just line some things out, or you just get them on the phone, so I have some concerns about that, or shoot them an email. I've done that where I have concerns about paragraph 6, subsection A, with this wording, and I would like to cross that out. And you'd be surprised how often they'll say, okay.
Excellent. Okay.
Not always, but.
Molly, did you have a question?
Yeah, but I'm on a delay, so my question is, how common is it for newbie authors to have unrealistic expectations with the contracts, and how can we tell the difference between just being uninformed or uncomfortable and reaching for the moon? What are some of the unrealistic expectations that we should let go of?
Well, a lot of it centers on money, and the reason is every year there's somebody who writes their first book and gets a 7-figure advance. Most of them you'll never hear from again. And the reason is their books don't make the 7-figure advance back, and so no publisher will touch them. There's some detriment to getting the big advance, except they get to keep the money. And that's one of the things you look for. Stay away from anything that says that you have to pay any of the advance back for any reason. Be very careful about that. Yeah, we do fall in love with the idea of making, wheelbarrow full of money by doing these things. Most of the time it's not, especially now. Advances are down, and it's just part of the economy and the changing publishing industry, but right now they're kind of down. Someone just wrote that the publishing is suffering from PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, from 2008, when a lot of them almost went out of business. So yeah, there's that, or the fame. We get so excited that somebody loves us and loves our book so much we'll sign anything. And don't do that. You can end a career. Okay, it is a business. Love it for a while, but then read the contract and get serious.
Well said. Well said. So I did have one last question for me, and then I think we got a question or two in the room, and that's this. In terms of cover design and editing, it's normally the publisher's realm. They kind of do that on their own, but can the author finagle something to where they work with the publisher, suggest suggest editors and cover designers?
Generally, no. Most of the larger publishers use in-house editors and copy editors. They're already on the payroll. It doesn't make sense for them to go outside and pay more money to an editor than what they're paying somebody who already knows the house style and those kinds of things. So no, you usually don't get to choose your editor. With smaller publishers, you can. There have been a couple of times where I've had to face that problem. I'm sorry, I just got distracted by something. Oh, where I did recommend an editor because I'd worked with the editor, and I knew that publisher used outside editors, so I just recommended her. I said, if you can work that out, great. It'd be a blessing to me if you can do that, and they did, and they got an excellent edit out of it. So did I. Other times they say, no, we have the people we work with. Cover art, we would like to think that we're all artists and we know what sells. We don't. Most of the time, you will not get a say in the cover. Most publishers have enough integrity to ask your opinion on them. I've received sometimes as many as 6 or 8 cover ideas, and I would say these are my favorites of these, and then they keep messing with them until they come up with something. A couple of times I've got covers I just didn't like. But even some of the best-selling authors don't get that. I know a best-selling author, and she hated her cover on the book, but she did not have rights of refusal on the cover. Now, some do. some do, but most of the time you don't, and at our level, I wouldn't expect it.
So if I draw my own cover with some pretty compelling stick figures, probably not going to make the cut, is what you're telling me?
I'm telling you, yeah, it might be the last time you submit a cover. But I have known people do that, and they do it in their proposals. They'll design the cover, they'll put it on the front, and they say, see, I've even given you the cover. Cover art is very difficult in a very specialized field. I don't know if you ever watched the TED speeches. There's somebody from one of the major publishers did the Jurassic Park cover for Michael Crichton's book. And he talks about the process they go through and how he came up with that and some of the other covers. Fascinating stuff, but those guys are a special breed of artists. And most of the time, they'll deliver something that's really, really good. Most of the time. There are a few thinking, looks like that guy was on a bender when he did this one because it just doesn't work. But that doesn't happen too often.
Yeah. Well, we do have a couple questions from the chat room. Marie Bast wants to know that in terms of like attorneys, she says, should we get our own attorney as writers? Should we get our own attorneys to go over the contracts to protect our interests? And that is there a particular type of attorney you should be looking at? Molly Jo already mentioned that we recommended an entertainment attorney. Pops, is that still what you would say?
Yeah. Just like some attorneys work in injury cases, some work in criminal law, some work corporations, some work taxes. They're entertainment attorneys, and that's the one you want because there's all kinds of different entertainment contracts, and they're the ones that know the ins and outs of that, and then most of the publishers will know those attorneys. Now, the only problem with getting an attorney, and I would never advise not getting one, it's probably a good idea, but attorneys like to be paid.
Really?
So just remember, unless you want to use your advance on that, they're going to want to be paid for their time and their expertise. So for me, it has not matched the risk. I just made sure that I'm not putting myself in some kind of legal exposure to something. I'm very careful about that. But if unless the book really, really sells well, it's just I can't afford the attorney.
So unlike first-time writers, attorneys actually want to get paid.
Right.
That's what I'm hearing. Okay.
Right.
All right. And Bruce Brady asks, and this is a really good question, do boutique publishers market on a par with the big houses? And Pops, what do you say to that?
This one may surprise you. I'm going to say for the most part, yes. And here's why. Most of the major publishers have gone to asking the authors to be the marketeers of the book, which is, and I said this I think last time or a week before that, it's one of the worst ideas in publishing ever. You're asking the novice to do something the novice was never trained to do. And that's one reason now a lot of publishers are going to, do you have a big platform? And really what they want is they want pre-sales out of this. And I can understand that. What's happening with some of the smaller publishers is they really know how to work the internet. They know how to do the social media. They know how to stay active in things. I'm thinking of your publisher, for example. That's what they work. Now you're going to have to do that with any publisher. You're going to have to do social media and stuff, and they will provide people to help you do that. But a lot of it is shifted to the author. So right now, I would be hard pressed to say that, with exceptions of the bestsellers, the best-selling authors get the best marketing. It used to be publishers invested in bringing writers into being best-selling authors. They don't do that as much anymore, if at all. But if you are, name a big author. We use Stephen King again. If you're Stephen King, you get some of the best promotion, and rightly so. I remember Jerry Jenkins, when he was doing the Left Behind series, he got a ton of promotion. But then again, he was selling tens of thousands of books, so the publisher could afford it. It was possible to do that. That's something they could do with mine. So, yeah, I would say they do a good job, and it's always good now for a writer to do a lot of their own marketing. With nonfiction, especially if you do a lot of public speaking, it's hard to be a public speaker based on fiction. There's a few tricks you can do with getting radio interviews for a novel, but most of the time you can't get those anymore. But you have to find a way to move those books.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, you do. All right. And that was actually going to be my answer too, and that's what I've heard from other writer friends who are with some bigger houses, is that the marketing just isn't there like it used to be. So, so yeah, there's that. That is our show. That's what we got. We actually got through all the show notes this week, so that's exciting. Next week, we will not be casting. There's the bad news. The good news is it's because we're going to be in North Carolina at the Blue Ridge Mountain Christian Writers Conference, hanging out with writers, drinking coffee, putting our feet up, relaxing. We tried to set something up that we were pretty excited about trying to bring you some content from there. We may still bring you some content from there, but it's not going to be live Tuesday night at 6:30. So next week, don't bother tuning in because we won't be here, but we will be back the following week, probably talking about marketing. And at a future date, we'll probably put together some of that content that we're going to be doing up at Blue Ridge. We are all three very much looking forward to that, and we will miss you guys, and hopefully you will miss us, and we'll see you again in 2 weeks. But until then, you can always find us at altongansky.com, franklymydearmojo.com, aarongansky.com, and heatherluby.com. Don't forget to ask the author. Find us on the Facebook and Twitter and all of that good stuff. So we do thank you all for listening, and until next week, good writing.